thanks a lot for coming, Navid. And I'm your host, Sarah Zal, for our listeners. And Navid is an awarded executive coach and the author of the book called Mastering Executive Transitions. And with over 2 decades of leadership experience across various industries and countries, Navid is an expert in helping executives in their career transitions. And welcome to our show, Navid.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I've been very much looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. Me too. And Navid, you have a great career journey and you worked in different locations, geographies, industries. So can you tell us a little bit more about your background and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So first off, allow me by saying that I have what is considered an unusual career background in that I started to work in sales for the first 6 years before I discovered my passion for the HR function. Mm-hmm. And it was really hard to land a job in HR at the time. I was based in Germany, and every time I applied for an entry-level HR position, someone rang me up and said, "So sorry, you seem to have applied for the wrong job. We have very good openings in sales for you." And it only took one individual to really, give me the chance, and that's what I can share with anyone. It takes some time and resilience to get to what you want, but it will be well worth it. So the name of the individual is Danja Frech. She became my first HR leader. And that was with Adidas. And that was, in the year 2002. So it's been an incredible journey since then. I spent the next 20 years working in the HR function, and I had an incredible time. I worked in 5 countries and for some of the world's most admired companies over that 20-year time period. So that's been kind of my journey. It's been a great ride, and since the summer of 22, I am on my own. I have set up my coaching practice that I used to run on the side as a passion project. As a full-time capacity. So I made my passion now my full-time profession.
That's great. Yeah, congratulations. And also, thanks a lot for bringing your book to me, Mastering Executive Transitions. I think you felt really pride when you get the book on your hands, right? So you feel it at the end.
It is indeed, yes. And I must say, and this is a little secret that's not very much known, it took me 7 years to write this book from start to finish.
Yes.
So it really felt like a very hard piece of work. And I certainly underestimated what it takes to write an actual book. I thought of it to be maybe a year-long project, but it certainly took me a lot longer than I anticipated.
Yeah, but I'm sure you put a lot of insights, thoughts, and experience in it during this time. That is very valuable. Right.
Yes, and so much so that, the appendix is 22 pages. I have 156 citations in my book, and this was really important to me. I didn't want to write a book that it can be considered my autobiography, or this is what I think of leadership, and this is, now you take it and copy and paste and hope that's going to work for you as well. So I really wanted to have a book that is very much grounded in research and at the same time offers practical implementation advice. And the combination of the two, I think, is what made the book to be so successful.
Great. And what do you hope readers will take away from this book?
Yes, so I, when I speak at large events, the first sentence that I open my keynote with is, "I am on a mission." And my mission is to help as many executive leaders as I can to help them succeed. Because I know that it's a very risky undertaking. 40% of all executives are failing when they go through a major career transition. And so 4 out of 10 don't make it. And this is my hope, that the book addresses those leaders. At the same time, the book can be also a good guide for HR leaders, those that are in charge of the onboarding and transition process in their firms. And last but not least, there are many, many amazing coaches out there that are working with clients and supporting them through the transition. And there isn't a single transition framework out there other than what I have cited in my book that is fit for purpose at the very top of the house. And so there's this other very famous book, The First 90 Days. I loved reading that book over 20 years ago when someone gifted it to me. but it's written for anyone and everyone. And because of that, it cannot be fit for purpose for the executive level leaders.
And it was quite many years ago as well, right? So
it's very dated.
we needed
indeed.
to update that version a little bit.
Yes, I believe Michael Watkins, who is the professor who wrote the book, is currently in the process of writing a revised version of it. But I have no idea whether it's going to be launched this year or next year.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll follow up. And so, from your perspective, I mean, you are working with many different C-level leaders all around the world, and you see probably different personalities, different skill set that executives have to be successful in this career transition. But from your experience, what do you see the most important qualities or skills that executives should possess, especially to be successful in these transition times?
Yes. So this is what I actually did not do because I didn't want to focus on a particular type. Let's imagine if I had done that and I come up with what is the optimal type of a leader that is successful in transitions. What happens to all the other leaders that don't have that type?
Yeah.
So my angle to help those leaders to succeed more frequently, more often, was not to focus on a particular type or a particular skill, but actually look at what I call successful interventions. So there are many interventions, and I describe 12 of them in my book, that executive leaders, the HR partners, and the companies that are hiring those leaders can do to make that transition more successful for that leader.
Yeah, and everyone has also their authentic themselves too, right?
That's
so
right.
they need to show that authenticity in that transition time.
That's correct.
Otherwise, yeah, it becomes like copy-paste solutions. And of course, this first 90 days or 100 days, whatever we call, is really critical. And but it can be challenging as well for new executives, right? So according to one of the McKinsey study, they mentioned that within this first 90 days, if the executives can be successful, and they will actually really reach out their business goals, personal goals after that. So, but there are also lots of pitfalls along the way, right? So there are mistakes that executives can make, or there are some potential pitfalls. What do you say about those ones? So what are those that we need to be careful to overcome?
Sure. So first off, allow me by saying that first 90-day or first 100-day or first 120-day approaches are nowhere near sufficient for executive leaders. This is the first point I want to make.
It's too short, you mean?
It is far too short. Yeah. And if I wanted to use the example that I introduce in my book, the double diamond framework of executive transitions, it's a 12 to 18 months journey. And by the way, it consists of 7 different phases. And only one of the 7 phases is the first 90 days. So that should give you and the listeners and the viewers an idea around how much more there is to an executive level leader transitioning versus a first-time manager, going through the structured first 90 days onboarding.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to share is the first phase of my double diamond framework, which is called Discover. This is your minus 90 to day 0. It is beyond me why a newly appointed CEO that's been announced already to take over the reign from an existing one should wait until their first day in the role to start adding value to their onboarding and to their organization. And so again, I think this is one of the big misses of the first 90-day or first 120-day approaches that suggest that you should wait until day 1 to get going. And I think, at best, the executive will leave money on the table by waiting until day 1 and only then get themselves onboarded. And so these are just 2 giveaways that I wanted to share.
Okay.
But if I wanted to share one of the other key takeaways from the book, one of the 12 interventions, if nothing else, just by making sure that the executive leader is supported by a specialized transition coach, that in itself reduces the risk of derailment from 40% to 20% or lower. And at the same time, and this is the often overlooked angle to the same, that executive leader and their 4 independent studies coming to the same conclusion will reach what is considered the productivity level or the productivity break-even point 50% or more faster than they would normally do. So let's say a company X, large multinational company, hires an external CEO to come and join them. Studies prove that that CEO that's been externally hired will take anywhere between 6 to 9 months after they start in the job to start giving back value to the firm. And so what would be the value to that organization if that CEO was able to reach that productivity level point in 3 or 4.5 months rather than a 6 or 9 months time period? And this is just one of the interventions that I speak about in my book.
Great. Yeah, no, I think that's very, very, very valuable insight. And organizations should be prepared for that too, right? To help the executive to onboard successfully from HR perspective, as you said, also from the board perspective. And let's talk a little bit about the gender bias. Gender bias or gender topics are always on the agenda in the corporate world today. And there are many researchers say that women are often evaluated more harshly than men in the leadership positions, which can affect executive transition as well, especially moving to a new role. So what do you say, or how do you observe the difference between female executives and male executives in managing this transition and getting support from their organizations?
Sure. So first off, when we look at the overall failure rate of 40%, and again, I cite 4 independent studies that all come to very similar conclusions, if not the same. The most validated one of those 4 studies is from Heidrick & Struggles, one of the largest search firms in the world. And what they have done is they have looked at a 10-year time period during which they have placed over 20,000 executive leaders into thousands of organizations, of which 40% were not around anymore 18 months after their appointment. And so the 40% failure rate is very much validated and something that we really have to look into. So when I look at that in itself, there is no difference between male leaders failing or female leaders failing. So that's the good news. There is no gender gap or bias in that. However, and this is one of the reasons I delayed the launch of my book by a few months, I got a study sent to me by DDI, this is Development Dimensions International, that looked at executive transitions as a general topic. And whilst the study did not have in focus to point out any gender gap in supporting those executives, this is one of the surprise findings of that study. So what they did is what every good study should do. They asked for the demographics of the executives that filled out that study. So they say, if you're comfortable, name your gender, name the size of your firm, how much revenue does this organization make, what level in the organization are you at, and so on and so forth. And what they found out is that there is a significant gap in the support that the male executives are receiving from the same organizations than the female counterparts. And this is one of the reasons I delayed the book, because I really wanted to dedicate a little bit more to this topic. Now, unfortunately, because this was a surprised finding of the study, they didn't offer any more insights into as to why that is the case. But if I wanted to just break it down for your listeners and viewers, there are 3 concrete support mechanisms that the organizations give to the executives, where the male executives are getting a lot more of these than the female counterparts. The delta, or the gap between the female and the male execs, ranges from 13 to 22 percentage points, which is statistically significant.
Wow. Yeah.
So the first item is, after the executive has been appointed, or as a preparation for the big promotion, they were able to participate in a dedicated leadership training or course. That's the first item. The second item is the executive was supplied with a diagnostic or a psychometric assessment and a full debrief to have developmental input into the big position that they're going into. And third, and last but not least, and probably one of the most important items, is that executive leader was provided with a transition coach or a senior mentor in the organization. And so any one of these 3 items, if we look at it, there is a gap, as I said, between 13 to 22 percentage points, which brings us to the question of how can this be? And we can speculate widely as to why that is. If I reflect on my humble HR experience over the last 20 years, I find that male executives that I dealt with are much more forthcoming with what they want, the amount of money they want as part of the new promotion increase, the corner office, a bigger car than what the policy is allowing them, maybe a second assistant, and so on. So they were much more forthcoming and demanding in what they want, versus the female leaders that I interacted with are much more decent and much more conservative in making those demands towards the organization. And that is, I believe, without looking into the topic, one of the key reasons why there is such a delta in the support. And quite frankly, if we were to look forward and look ahead and say, what is the one intervention that could eliminate any of these gaps? It's simply by making sure that the organization doesn't make any of those components negotiable, but it's baked into the promotion process. So let's say if it's a large organization, we may consider the vice president level and above to be part of the executive grading. And so if that is the case, anyone who is being promoted into VP, SVP, or EVP will automatically be entitled to these services. And they are there to support the leader. Now, of course, if the leader feels good and competent and wouldn't want to make use of item 1 or 2 or 3, it's perfectly fine. But it doesn't become a negotiable that male execs are much more likely to come forward and ask for it or demand for it, versus the female execs being much more decent and reasonable with what they want.
So making this process more standardized for everyone, not only for gender, but also cultural origins as well, I guess, right? The experience level, because everyone can be different at that point. Right. So I think we need visionary leaders at that point as well, like who can design these programs, right, in the organizations.
Yes and no. I'm not sure it takes really visionary leaders to do that. It really should be good HR practice. Right? It you know, if you think about it, Sarah, I worked for some of the world's most admired companies. I worked at the country level, at the regional level, and at global levels. And none of them really had what I would consider a world-class onboarding for the most senior leaders. Some of them didn't have any dedicated process. That means that if you're a call center agent or you're the group CEO, you get the same onboarding process. Now, that silly example should really
extreme,
be
but it can be the case.
A point of concern for anyone. Because again, I'm citing a study that was conducted by Genesis Advisors, and they interviewed CEOs and CEOs only. They interviewed over 400 of them, and they did that with one of the large search firms. I believe they did it with Korn Ferry or Egon Zehnder. It was Egon Zehnder. And 70% of those CEOs that were surveyed on what was your onboarding experience like said that it was either non-existing or it was completely underwhelming, right? Now, mind you, we're talking about the top leader of the organization. And so there is this inherent belief that if you go out and hire the very best, most competent leader, that they are competent enough to succeed. So it becomes a bit of a sink or swim type situation where we know that 4 out of 10 simply don't make it. And when I say that, I have cited 6 of the world's most admired companies, just to give away some names: Airbus, Hewlett-Packard, SAP, and Uber are those that have had very most senior leader, the group CEO, having a transition failure at the very top of the organization. So it's not something that is, that great organizations are prone to or immune against. The 40% failure rate pretty much applies all across the board.
Exactly, yeah. So especially from organizational culture perspective, like a politics perspective as well, I think these are the 2 things can be trickiest part of the executive transitions as well. Because as a new executive, you don't, especially if you are joining a new organization, of course, you don't know about the culture. Of course, you need to do a little bit preparation in advance, as you mentioned, and based on the framework. However, still, when you enter to that organization, you need to spend time to build relationships, know people, create internal network. So, what do you advise to executives to navigate this organization culture and politics, especially if there are some existing issues, conflicts in the organization?
Sure. So you're touching upon a very important point, which is I dedicated a full chapter just to the top 10 reasons for failure. And again, it wouldn't probably surprise anyone by saying that it's not the technical skills or the lack of them that gets in the way. It's what we in HR call the soft skills. And as we know, they are very hard to learn and come by. So if I wanted to aggregate and group the top 10 reasons for failure into 3 group reasons, the 3 reasons are people, culture, and politics. Now, so as you see, it's very rare that the company hires a group CFO and he or she isn't really good with the numbers. It's almost impossible that the firm hires a chief people officer and he or she isn't really good with the people agenda, right? So it's not the technical or the functional skills or the lack of those that gets in the way. It's what we call people, culture, and politics. And so politics is one of the top 3 reasons for failure. And of course, there isn't a degree course in which you can learn how to deal with politics. But boy, if someone went through a very good assessment, such as the Hogan assessment, and sat down and had a full debrief with their coach, what they will know at least is how good are they at managing those, and if there is a development area that needs to be addressed. And so again, there are many great books out there that help you to become a better leader in managing politics, not necessarily become a politician yourself, but this is what's really important, is that you have to have a degree of awareness around your own skills, as well as what is the prevailing culture and politics in the organization and how to deal with that. And this is one of the reasons, by the way, why the executive transition failure rate is slightly higher for external promotions than internal hires. It's not significant, but let's say if you're looking at the 33 to 37% internal promotion failure rate versus a 43 to 47% externally hired promotion rate. And so there is a difference between the 2 groups, but despite that, 33% is still more than 3 out of 10 are not making it.
Yeah, indeed, still is, although they know the internal culture and politics,
Yes,
that's still the
yes,
case, because they are changing the role and the level.
And there are 2 reasons for that exactly. I mean, one of them is, when I used to work for a multinational company, an FMCG company at the time, and I moved from a regional role into the global head office, it almost felt like I've joined a new organization, right? It's the same organization, it's the same set of values I see on the walls, but boy, the living up to those values felt fundamentally different. So that's the first reason why you can still fail, although you're technically an insider. The second reason is, and this is the irony, Sarah, there are organizations who do provide executive transition coaching support to the executives, but they stop to provide them to internal promotions because they assume, as some people might assume, that no, they know everything. There's no need to support them. And this is one of the other reasons why the failure rate is so high, because as you say, it's a whole different game and it's a different level leadership that is required. And as my fellow coach, Marshall Goldsmith, says it, what got you here won't get you there.
Yes, such a great book as well, by the way, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So we talk a lot about these failures because we need to be careful, right, to not go to that pitfalls. Let's talk a little bit about the successful cases too. I really love stories and case studies, which you actually mention a lot on the researches as well. So maybe you can give us one of the memorable success stories or case studies that you included in your book to highlight effective this executive transition.
Yes. So without mentioning the name of the leader, their firm or anything like that, because in my business setup, confidentiality is absolutely critical. So the case, which is a real case that I supported, was an executive leader who used to be a country leader in one of the large professional services firms, who was appointed to become chief people officer. And so imagine that, in my book, I described that case as the Champions League of executive transitions, because that individual had 6 unique transition challenges coming their way. And so not having spent a single day working in the HR function and suddenly becoming group CHRO for an organization that has more than 200,000 employees is certainly a big ask. And so with that comes a cross-functional challenge. The second challenge that the individual was faced with was to get the big promotion challenge, which again, it's one thing to lead at the country level for 1,000 or 2,000 people, or suddenly being one of the leaders of a 220,000 a man and woman organization. The third challenge that they were faced with was to move into a role and the predecessor being asked out prior to them. So that means that there was certainly a burning platform on the HR side of the business that really needed quick and urgent attention. The fourth challenge that the individual was faced with was that there was very little buy-in from the inherited HR leadership team, in particular because there were two individuals in that team that had high hopes of landing the CHRO role one day. One of them was a named successor to the position, and the individual wasn't even asked to participate in the process. So she was just presented her new boss.
Big disappointment.
And of course, and over and above that big disappointment was, the leader that I supported was faced with unprofessional behavior, which was that individual that was disgruntled as a result of getting a new boss and not being invited to participate in the process as a named successor, started to go around and campaign against the incoming boss to say, can you imagine, Serap? This individual has never worked a day in HR. How can she lead the HR function? Right? Yeah. For a company of our size.
It's a good
we're
challenge
not a startup, right?
for the executive.
And so that was the fifth one. And then the sixth challenge that the individual was faced with was to really restructure and reorganize the HR function. And the one that I didn't mention is that the individual also had to move with the family internationally. You get a real sense for, any one of these challenges alone would be enough reason to be really mindful about this transition. But the combination of these challenges at the same time really made that to be kind of the Champions League of transitions. And so, yes, so we engaged, as I always do. I work on year-long engagements only. And there are two reasons for that. At the start of my journey as a coach over 12 years ago, I would offer 3 months programs, 6 months programs. But I've stopped doing that for many years now because I find that at the executive level, it takes usually a year or longer to transition successfully. And the second reason is that, at that level, behavior change or acquiring a new skill usually takes time as well. And the third and most important reason is that despite HR's efforts to simplify the performance management process and the cycle and having more than once a year conversations, performance is ultimately measured once per year. And so these are the 3 reasons why I only offer year-long engagements for my executive leaders. And so some of the things we did, just to give a very broad idea about how we went about the engagement, is we started before the individual were in the role. So we started at the minus 90 days to day 0, rather than waiting for day 1 to come and then start to have these conversations. The individual connected with the newly inherited HR leadership team, and so got already a sense for this particular woman that was very angry and kind of not supportive of that promotion. And the individual also had another person on the team that was just too tired. She had seen 4 or 5 CHROs in a row, and I just wasn't
too much change,
excited
maybe, right?
to go all the way again and live up to a new CHRO. And so that individual actually took an early retirement package and left the firm. So some of the things we did was, next to starting before they won, we started to map the stakeholder landscape. And the stakeholder landscape was crucial to the individual because the individual didn't have an appreciation for what it takes to succeed at the head office level. As I said, if you are the most senior person in your country, you have the regional lead, and that's the only person you need to pay attention to. But now you are giving the tone in the organization for a full function, and so you have to map your stakeholder universe. That individual also had 4 conversations, crucial conversations, as I call them, with the chairman of the firm. At the time of the appointment, there was no CEO installed in that firm. So the chairman essentially was also the CEO of the organization. And so we meticulously prepared the individual for these upcoming conversations. We would sit down and think about what are the one or two key messages that the individual would want to leave the chairman with after the meeting, and what was the individual hoping to get out of those conversations. And so it sounds a little overtly prepared, but actually for those crucial conversations, you will never be able to over-prepare. Yeah. And so we mimicked these conversations. I pretended to be the chairman in our coaching sessions ahead of the actual conversation taking place. And then, the individual would pitch to me the key messages and what the individual was hoping to get out of that conversation. And then on the back end of that session, I would give feedback to the individual to say what worked, why certain messages were not quite concise and crystal clear, and what the individual can do to make those, more sharpened and land them in a more effective way. And so that was the preparation. And then on the back end of those sessions, we would then again usually have a 15-minute telephone conversation to say, okay, how did it go? Were you able to land the key messages? If so, great. If not, what went wrong, and how might you want to apply a different tactic next time? And so these are just some examples, but hopefully this is enough to give you an idea that an executive transition is never a 90-day job. There is no prescriptive anything that would apply to this. And one of the things that actually happened to that individual is that roughly halfway through our engagement, so after about 6 months, the chairman decided to install a new CEO. And so the individual then reported into the CEO, and that CEO did not connect very well with the CHRO. And so that meant that the individual had to go through a whole new transition halfway through our engagement. And so again, just to kind of moving fast forward at the end of our engagement, which was the 12 months mark, the chairman and the CEO broke the rule of the firm because the individual inherited a role that was only lasting for 2 years. The predecessor had been prematurely fired after 2 years. They bended the rule of the firm to give a 3-year extension a year into the role. So that meant that the individual could look ahead for another 3 years in the role and didn't have to worry to be sent back home or be out of a job a year down the line. And what is exceptionally rare is that individual received and exceeds performance rating in the first year in the role, which, as you know and I know, Sarah, it's always political games at play in a company. Yes, and it's always easy to tell a newly promoted leader, you had your first year, you can't be outperforming expectations in your first year of being promoted. So next year, hopefully, is going to be a good year for you. Yeah. And so these are just some of the outcomes I want to point out. And of course, as we speak, the individual is still in the role and enjoying.
That's good. Yeah, great example. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And that's why I really love these stories, and because it's really inspiring as well. There are lots of unexpected things happening along your journey, and new CEO coming, your teams are changing, and there are COVID and other pandemic and lots of uncontrollable things are coming into our life. So that's a beauty of the journey too, right? I mean, that's a nice ride that you learn and develop each time. But of course, when you have a support from your organization, from your coach, I think that really helps you to succeed in your role and also help others succeed too.
Yes. And this is also important because the way that I was brought up as a coach, I took on a very laborious way to educate myself and train myself to become a coach. So it was a 3-year journey across 3 continents, and it was very laborious. But I'm glad I did it that way. And one of the philosophies that we apply as coaches is that it doesn't matter what you think of yourself, how great a job you think you did, what sophisticated methods and frameworks you applied in your work with the client. The only thing that matters is what the client and their immediate surrounding think of the impact of the coaching. That's all that matters. And whether you got there after 1 session or 20 sessions, that doesn't matter as well. all that matters is what the client and the immediate surroundings are able to say about the impact and the value they received as a result of the coaching.
Yeah.
And so it's incredibly humbling to receive all these testimonials and all the great feedback from the clients. And in my books, that's the only, currency that matters, and not, with all due respect, if CEO today names me the #1 coach in the world, or if some other organization names me an iconic whatever coach, these are all good things to have. But what really matters is ultimately the client satisfaction.
Yeah, exactly. No, I can see that you have passion, which drives all those achievements. And that's great. And I can't believe that we came at the end of our episode. And of course, I have many other questions. Maybe we can do a second round. But thanks a lot for signing the book for me as well, Navid. It was really a pleasure to meeting you today, and also for your time to meet our listeners. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much. And if I may say, if anybody wanted to reach out to me and contact me, Navid Nazemian on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my only and main platform. And so I am the person behind my profile. I am very friendly. I'm always happy to connect with leaders and those that aspire to be leaders one day.
I was following you actually on LinkedIn for some time, and you really share insightful posts as well. I think that's also really nice. And thanks a lot to our listeners for tuning in. And until next episode, stay uplifted and take care. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.
You.